First of all, I just want to call attention to Yael's note in the chat is to please update your Zoom name to first, last, and JCC. And if it's just easier to put the city of your JCC, that might be the easiest thing. And please feel free to include your pronouns if you would like. That is user's choice.
Nicole, one thing I wanted to say, sorry.
Yep.
Before we jump into the thing, we wanted to just acknowledge that we heard the feedback that we got from folks last week. And so we have built in a 25-minute break in between the first half and the second half of today, which will give you, I know that it's going to fall at a weird time depending on which coast you're on, but it will give you substantive time to like prep some food or grab some food, and we hear that. So we
walk the dog.
Point that out.
Lori,
if the break happens on time, it will be at 2:05 on East Coast time.
You heard the first part of the sentence though, right? If the break happens on time, but it won't be far off of that. I think ish is accurate. Okay, so we want to give you an opportunity with a partner this morning to just take a moment and really reflect on walking away from training at the end of the day, last Tuesday, Wednesday, till today. Can you find a moment that the material came alive for you? And what I mean by that is you had a thought, it came back to you in a moment, on your feet, whether in conversation with somebody else, in a way that you engaged with somebody at work, in something you read on social media that now you thought, oh, that relates to that feedback thing we were talking about, right? Can you find a moment where the material just really came alive for you, whether in action or in thought? Does that make sense, what I'm asking? Okay, anybody not clear? Great. Okay, so we're going to put you into breakouts just to kind of have a moment to talk about that. I'm trying to pay attention to my leaning forward problem. Sorry. All right, so just a pair share. We thought it'd be nice to just have a little space one-on-one. Yael, take them away.
I just need one moment.
You can have 2 moments.
Thank you.
And I want to reiterate again, like, we welcome you eating, drinking, taking a bio break if the need arises before we actually take an official break, and doing what you need to do to take good care of yourself so that you can be present. And if you need to step away, just, if you're able to just let, like, for more than a moment, to just pop something in the chat and let us know. Whether you're leaving for a moment and coming back, that would be helpful for us. It's really great to see everyone's faces this morning, this afternoon, this day.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Great, thanks, Yael.
Great.
You're welcome.
In a few. Did you have to count?
Welcome back, everyone. I think we're waiting for a few more breakout rooms to empty and come back. It's great to see everyone. So how is that? Love to hear from a couple of folks, like, what's the thing that came alive for you? Yeah, we'd love to hear from a couple of people. If you want to unmute and share, what's something that came alive for you, or that you had an aha moment or a huh moment. So we welcome people. Anyone?
I can say something.
Natalie.
I'm always willing to share. So, my aha moment was as we were reading one of the examples last week. It occurred to me that actually happened to me in my first job, almost verbatim. Like they went out, had a good time, and then the next day they come into work and there's this rumor spreading about them. At the time, like, I was young. It was my first job. I was like 15. I laughed it off. I convinced myself it was not a big deal. And now thinking back on it, it's if I had taken that to heart and been really hurt by that, I can see how that would affect not only like my physical safety, my psychological safety, but it also would have affected me wanting to advance in my career at the JCC. Like it was heartbreaking for me or it's heartbreaking for me now. It was not heartbreaking for me then, but just realizing that can even resurface after all these years.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie, for sharing that. And you named something really important, which is a key piece of why we do this work, which is that these kinds of interactions impact people in the moment, and they also impact career decisions, right? Being mistreated particularly for those of us who see ourselves as part of the Jewish community, to then work in the Jewish community and be poorly treated by our community in a space. No one should be poorly treated at work. It's very disconcerting, and it can lead people to say, yeah, I don't ever want to work in a Jewish agency again, right? I've seen that happen. And so for the sake of the individual employees, for creating an organizational culture of safety and accountability, and for the community at large, it's the stakes. That's where the stakes are. So thank you, Natalie. Anybody else want to share an aha or something that just resonated with you, or you noticed, like, as you were engaged in your work or in the world, something that stood out for you and you recognized, oh, this is connected to what we've been learning about? Anyone else? Yeah, Rena.
One of the things that stood out was that the culture starts from the second you walk in the door. And so, I think a lot of times the thought of like someone might be having a hard day, or they may have like, well, we're stuck in traffic or whatever. And so giving some leeway of like why someone might be acting a certain way or why they may be behaving a certain way. But like from the second you walk in the door, if somebody's greeting you with a smile and a hello, or giving you, that cue of this is a welcoming space, that starts off the conversation right, instead of it being like, what do you need from me? And so starting that culture off with like a positive note starts from the second you walk in the door. And so I think that really resonated with me, and I've noticed it. I've like been very cognizant walking in, to the building, and like noticing who's giving that like positive vibe and really like welcoming people into the building and into their space. That's definitely been noticeable.
Thanks, Rena. Yeah. I would add to that, noticing like, and when people, like, we can also cultivate our curiosity, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today, right? Cultivating curiosity when someone isn't offering those cues to like get curious, like what might be going on for that person today that they, right? That they were like, what do you need? Right? As opposed to, hey, good to see you. And then how can I, right? And to be curious and to notice. Thank you. Thank you both. Thanks to both of you for sharing that. So we want to open it up a little bit more and ask what's percolating for you? Any burning questions or thoughts that you want to share? We have about 10 minutes for kind of open forum question, concern, ahas, whatever is percolating before we dive into the content again.
So I have a question, and hopefully the group think can help with this. So it's a lot of material and a lot of good information, and we will plan how we're going to bring this to our teams and bring it out into our community. But how do we keep it ongoing? How do we train who's here now and continue to train those as they come in, knowing that we can't always dedicate 7 hours on a regular basis to go through all of the content? So what is the thought process? And maybe it's not answered right now, but like, can we all think about it and make sure that we're sharing as we move forward some of our ideas?
I
So
love
I think,
that question. Go ahead, Nicole.
thank you so much. So first of all, I love the idea. I love the added the piece of let's also share ideas. And I think that one thing that would be really, really valuable for this group that, you know, and it seems to be the intention of how the JCC Association staff is approaching this, is you are a cohort, right? And that there should be a way for you to be in communication and sharing, and some of that is set up already in your learning pods, but maybe there's a, you know, a place for shared ideas, or, you know, whatever various technology might offer that, I think is great. Talmud's model, you know, in general, is to be an ongoing relationship with the organizations using the materials for exactly that reason. But I think I may have shared last week that I spent time in the early iterations of this training before I was holding it myself, and it was in someone else's hands. And I went to the first training and I spent a lot of time writing in my notes, and then what, and then what, and then what, because, you know, great training, great. How do we make this into actionable change? So I would say a couple of things, very sort of baseline, like tactical. You know, you can think about how, at what points in the year you do the whole training with new staff, right? So you could decide like twice a year, you're just new staff are going to come, and you're going to have, you know, two half a days where training happens. But even if you were to have no new staff come in 2 years, which isn't going to happen for a JCC, but right, like you also aren't going to go back and do this training exactly as it's written, right? Like this, the same exact thing in content. So then it becomes a question of how we see this content, as I think of it as a textbook, where we can pull out pieces. Any one of these modules can be workshopped on its own. So while they build on each other, and while they're important frameworks that you don't want to lose entirely, the truth is, you could do any piece of this work as its own workshoppable module. And because we use scenarios and case studies, those pieces, so you could decide that once a year, you know, your
Nicole, your
program
internet connection.
directors
Nicole, your
are going, all supervisors. What?
Your internet
Is
connection
having a problem?
is very spotty, and you
that's-
keep freezing. So I don't know if there's something you want to check, and
I will look. I did not have any problem last week, so I can check. Am I still spotty?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Still spotty?
Yeah, you keep.
Okay, Andrea, take over.
Okay. I'm gonna step in. So just to pick up on what Nicole said, there are lots of ways to infuse this content and pick up little things, right? Like to have a conversation about like, what does it look like for us to be a feedback-rich culture, right? What might that actually look like? And to have a conversation about like, how does that work? What support do our supervisors and managers need in order to do that and do it well, right? And then, you know, it might be pieces of this curriculum. It might be things that are adjacent and other things that you're going to learn over the next, you know, 12 months, 10 months. I don't know how long the fellowship is, right? Through this JCulture 2.0 fellowship, right? And so, and I'm sure, and as you know, leaning on each other, like, how's it working? What have you come up with? One of the things that I often recommend to folks is think about small things. Maybe it's at the beginning of every staff meeting within each department, you take 5 minutes and you do a check-in, right? You do a turn to the person next to you and how are you feeling today, right? And why? Because that's inside creating a psychologically safe, right? It's saying you matter, not just, and like, yes, the meeting agenda is important, but this is actually part of the work, right? So it's doing little things like that, which are about building that culture, as well as figuring out ways to refresh and include the training. And I have no doubts that there are lots of folks on this call who have other ideas. So thanks for that question, Monica. It's fantastic. Other folks, other burning questions? Kai, I saw you raise your hand. Was that?
I was waving to a coworker who was waving to me through this glass window right in front of me. So apologies.
We'll wave at you though.
Great, thank you.
I think that you were alluding to this, but I just wanted to share a specific example that I have heard about from the person who originally we worked with on our curriculum, who has done tons and tons of training with the EEOC and lots of corporations. And she had a client who instituted a practice where at every meeting, no matter 2 people or 10, 20, they ended the meeting 5 minutes early and everybody had an accountability partner and turned to the other person and said, how did I show up at this meeting? And that was a piece of how they built their feedback rich culture. And it, and it was like, it's expected, right? You're going to get feedback. I mean, think about just that small practice alone, the magnitude of impact that could have. If you know that part of, the way you show, it's like we said last week, like Jan, there's a trick in the statement that Jan is a high performer, because how can she be a high performer if she's behaving terribly, right? Imagine if you start to understand that how you show up at work is actually equally reflective of your performance as your actual job deliverables, and that there's going to be accountability checks on that.
There, as Matt said in the chat, right, they're small things. They feel like, oh, of course, right, or basic, but in the pressures of achieve, produce, they are sometimes the first things that fall by the wayside. Right. And so it's worth thinking about it. Miriam, Chilton, I see that you're unmuted. I wondered if you had something.
Thank you. It's been helpful to go back and sort of share what it is that I've been learning over the days with my husband over the dinner table. And he works for a very large pharmaceutical company, and just sort of noting the differences between doing this kind of work when you are creating widgets or drugs, or where it's somewhat of a contained environment, versus a community center where so much of your culture isn't only so much about what happens on the staff level, but of the interactions that you have with the members of that community. And it's more of an ecosystem than just sort of an employment situation. Mm-hmm. And I think I may have brought this up earlier, but I'm still struggling, and it came out in our pairing up earlier today, when so much of the environment is how people treat you when they're at the reception desk, or what they say to the lifeguard in a bathing suit, or so I'm curious where this training is going to take us beyond sort of the staff conversation.
So I just want to name that I presented to the JCC Association's National Board 1,000 years ago. It was one of the last things I did before COVID that Joy had me come. It was January of 2020. And a board member came to me after the meeting and said exactly that, literally exactly that. This is really, I see the value in this. I think this is incredibly good, important work, and it's workplace focused. But we are dealing with, hundreds of people through the building all day long. And I said, absolutely. And one of the things I would like for Ta'amod and, and all of us who are involved in this work, like, we're one small growing organization doing this work. There are other small growing organizations doing this work, and we can all be leaders in how we address these issues and coming up with modalities and ideas and ways to work within our own environments. I think that part of the work that I see as it stands right now. So that my point was to say, yes, like there's work to be done to help specifically JCCs and I think congregations in a similar way, although I think that constituencies are more diverse at JCCs and sometimes bigger, to think about how we can build these principles into how we interact with members and other participants in our buildings and in our programs. And I also really think that when we do a consistent and holistic job and this work is alive in our staff, there's a way, because through active bystander intervention and the ways that we support and take care of what's happening in the culture around us, that there's some natural ways that the only word I can think of is bleeds, but I don't like that word. It touches, thank you, out beyond just the staff in an organic way also.
Yeah, and I will add to that, and then we're going to move into the content, Miriam, and this is for all of you, right? That like research shows time and time again,
yes,
when employees know that this is a priority of the organization that they work for, they are much more likely to come to their supervisor, to colleagues, to other people to say, hey, so-and-so didn't treat me well, right? And what that also means is that they get better at respectfully and compassionately being clear around boundaries and how they will and won't be treated by folks. Doesn't mean that they respond with rudeness to a member who's treating them rudely, but they know, I don't have to put up with this. This organization has my back, and it does not expect me to tolerate this kind of behavior. And so you get that information back. And one of the JCCs, Miriam, it might even be yours, has built into their membership forms, right, a covenant that says, these are the expectations that we have. And what it means to be a member of this JCC is also that this is how you treat each other. And I know that that's only sometimes as good as the paper that it's written
right,
on.
of course.
But the more, the more that it permeates the staff, and then the staff can kind of think about like, oh, what is the thing that we want to do for membership around X, Y, or Z? Like maybe you run, you talk to us about running a workshop about like difficult conversations and, giving and receiving feedback, or, there's lots of ideas, and we are here to support you. And as Nicole said, there's lots of other, and this whole amazing cohort of people is also there.
And part of the change maker work is intended to help you bring this into the community, and we're here to help you think about how to do that. And the last thing I'll say, and we'll move on, is just that, in the scenario down on the pool deck, when something happened, and I know this keeps coming up because I think the pool deck is rife for things, but right, when you have a member and there are two staff people there, and there's an inappropriate or problematic situation, and those staff members have received training and have some tools and have some skills and have some language, and as Andrea said, know the organization has their back, you're more likely to have a bystander intervention moment from one staff person to another, and that directly impacts the member behavior. So it's a really important question, Miriam, that we need to continue to be asking and responding to. So thank you for raising it. Andrea?
Yeah, so we're gonna pause the kind of question and dive there and go into the last two modules of the content that we weren't able to get to last week. And we're going to start, for those of you who are following along in the playbook, as it were, we're starting with module So 2 modules are module 6. This is the module 6 for supervisors and is responding with empathy. And it starts on page 52 of your manual, if you have that and you want to pull it out. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, Nicole, I'm going to share my screen.
I did just send you the most updated deck.
Yep, I have it. That's amazing. And I'm going to do the thing where I make the windows bigger so I can see everyone's wonderful faces. And we're going to start. So where we've landed, this piece of the content, which is for supervisors, is how to respond when someone comes to you to report or share that something is interfering with their ability to show up at work, something is interfering with their sense of psychological safety at work. And they've come to you to kind of share that information. And what I want to offer is that these are not planned conversations. So this part of the training is particularly for those in leadership positions in the organizations. And it is important here to kind of raise up, so I'm pulling up into a meta moment to say this is a moment of kind of pulling back in that thread of power, right? And recognizing that as supervisors, all else being equal, there is a power differential when supervisees come to them, and that they need to be mindful of that and their words and actions, because they play a particularly important role in promoting safety and respect within the workplace. And one of those things is responding with empathy and compassion. So can I get someone to just unmute and share, like, what does empathy mean to you? How would you define empathy?
I guess taking a moment to think about how the other person's experiencing something. So trying to sort of put yourself in there, just really understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Well, and I love that, Dana, you started with taking a moment, right? Like taking a moment, pausing, and just being with what the other person is sharing with you, right? We can't always know what it feels like, because we are all individuals and we come from different lived experiences and different embodied experiences, but we can be present, right? It's a very much a Hineni moment. So one of the things we talk about, right, is compassion, right? And the word compassion, and I love, Rena, we clearly are having a mind meld, right? That the word compassion is feeling with someone, right? You are the container, or you're creating the container, right? To be able to hold when someone is coming to you with something challenging, right? And in Hebrew, rahmanut, right? And what I love about the Hebrew word of compassion is, right, it is also a container, right? It comes from the same root as the word for womb in Hebrew, rechem, right? Which is a container, which is a holding place, right? A nurturing place. And so it is about feeling the other's reality, helping them to identify their specific needs, and then taking action to assist them, right? And all of that requires that Hineni, that full presence energy. And it's core to our Jewish ethical values, right? So when a staff member, and this is, I cited this just a moment ago, right? When staff members feel heard and listened to with compassion, they are much more likely to trust and engage with coworkers at their organization, and they are much more likely to let you know when something is interfering with their capacity to do the work that they have been hired to do. So empathy, the definition that we have, right, is that in the workplace, it's crucial to driving connection, which ultimately leads to enhanced performance, creativity, and engagement. So we think all the way back to our conversation about rudeness and incivility and the research that Christine Porath did that showed that when I am just witnessing rude or uncivil behavior, that impacts my creativity, it impacts my performance and my level of engagement. So empathy is kind of the opposite, right? When I experience empathy, I am much more likely to be engaged with my work, right? And that I might work even longer hours if I felt that my employer were empathic, really valuing me, right? It's challenge and it's rarely taught and it is difficult to measure, but we all know when we're experiencing the empathy of someone else, right? It's something that hopefully we've all had some experience with. And so we know when we're feeling it. And it really does make a difference, as the data on this slide show, right? 82% of people would leave their employer for a more empathic one, right? Nicole, did you want to add something?
No, I'm like, does that mean that majority of employers are not empathic? Yes, probably.
Well, I think what it means is that if they, yeah, I don't know.
I know, I was just being sad. Go ahead.
And this is data from Business Solver, a 2019 state of workplace empathy, as you can see on the slide. So we can see that it is a driver. And when, in this case, what we're talking about is someone's already experienced something that is interfering with their sense of safety at work or their capacity to do their work. And they have already kind of taken the step and made the decision to come to a supervisor and share what's going on. So I want to not underestimate that, right? That most people put up with things for a while under the false assumption that it's just going to go away, or that tolerating it is easier and better than taking the moment to report it, right? And so creating a safe and accountable workplace means that your employees are more likely to come to you when something shows up. So let's do a little bit more unpacking of empathy. So how many of you are familiar with the researcher and writer and speaker Brené Brown? I see a lot of raised hands. So she writes a lot about empathy and courage, and we're going to take a moment to just unpack empathy a little bit further and watch a quick video. It might be familiar to some of you. That's Brené Brown's video on empathy. So I'm going to stop my share, and Yael, we are ready for the video.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thanks, Yael. So, what did you notice? What stood out for you? Even if you've seen this 100 times, was something that popped out for you, particularly in this context of thinking about being a supervisor and an employee come to you? Marilyn.
I think it's something natural with us that if somebody is telling us something, and I mean, you want to make them feel better, and you want to make yourself feel better, because it's because you feel uncomfortable in it, rather than be vulnerable, which is something Brene Brown talks a lot about also, and just let yourself feel what they're feeling, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
Rebecca.
And it's challenging to resist that impulse to make it better. We want to make it better, right? And to remember that, like, it's very rare, as she said, that just saying something, right? And,
Rebecca has her hand up.
Thank you.
I think my impulse is to jump into problem solving. So especially at work, because I'm like, okay, you're coming to me with this issue, and like, let's figure it out. And so it's sometimes hard to like pause and just take that moment to connect first, or to really know what they need in that moment, because sometimes they do just have a problem that's a work problem, and I need to help them solve it. So yeah, just kind of walking that line and figuring that out.
Yeah, thank you. Miriam, I saw you unmute before you jump in. Just to say, Rebecca, like, I love that you said that. Often in the trainings, what we say when we're leading it for supervisors is like, of course you have an instinct to jump in and fix it. You are managers, you are supervisors. That is part of your job, is to jump in and fix. And this is a moment to resist that urge initially, to just be present and listen. Right, and that communication, and I'm going to talk about the communication triangle, but before I do, Miriam, did you have something you wanted to add? Thank you, Rebecca.
Anybody happen to read the article in the New York Times? I think it was this weekend. I think it was called something like "The Millennials Are Afraid of the Gen Z," or 37-year-olds are afraid of the 23-year-olds who work for them.
That sounds right.
I'll put a link in the
yes, please do
in the chat, because what was interesting about it is how the younger staff are showing up at work, and sort of what it is that they feel comfortable sharing, that I'm not quite sure I'm so comfortable supporting, and sort of how one acknowledges what it is that different people need, but recognizing that it can be very different sets of expectations depending on where you're coming from.
Absolutely. And Miriam, I love that you, by naming that article, you also raised that, or by pointing out that article, that like there are generational differences, right? Just in this room, in this cohort, there are generational differences, right? And that is going to continue to happen. And the things that, I mean, I've had this conversation sometimes with around gender discrimination in particular, with women, I'm in my early 50s, with women my age who like sit in that space of like being empathic to the experiences of the younger folks that they're supervising around gender issues, and then also needing a space where they get to talk about like, when I was whatever, I had to tolerate and there was no right, and to be able to notice, right? That's part of Hineni too, is what is this triggering in me in this moment that I want to put attention on? And can I hold that and find a space to put that attention, but not here in this moment, right? Because that's a piece of it too. Sometimes when an employee is coming to report something, it can be triggering for us. We're like, oh my God, do you know how many times I had to put up with that? Whatever, right? Obviously, we don't want to say that back to the employee, right? And we also don't want to shove that down. Like that needs some attention and healing as well. So it's a both and.
The work of managing new generations of professionals is part of the work of ongoing attention to culture, right? And it's not just generation, it's not just about generations, but you know, just sort of paying attention that like every individual and who comes into with their own lived experience, who comes into our staff communities impacts it, right? It's always a moving thing all the time, and how we pay attention to those things. There's lots that we're talking about in this training that we wouldn't have been talking about 3 years ago, but the conflation of COVID and the reckoning with racial justice and political realities are changing things. So we have to be in an ongoing, that's part of the culture work, is that ongoing conversation. And I just want to layer in something a little bit more like on the pragmatic side in terms of what we're talking about in terms of receiving reports with empathy. Part of this, this module came from a place of wanting to help supervisors and people who are managers and will be receiving, and we kept the word reports in here on purpose, with the understanding that like people may be coming to you, the supervisor, whether you are a supervisor on this training or you'll be training supervisors. So, you know, with something that's been going on for a long time where real harm has been done, it is already taking an enormous amount of courage for that person to walk into you and finally say something about it. The statistics on how long it takes a person to report significant cases of harassment and discrimination are well over a year often. And so we want to both showing up as our best selves rooted in Jewish and humanistic values, be empathetic, and it is actually pragmatically the best approach for the situation that may end up needing to have an investigation and become a real like incident within an organization, for this person to feel held and seen and connected in the moment that they're finally bringing it forward. It's actually what's also best for the organizational outcome of this situation.
Thanks, Nicole.
Good question.
Dana, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just thinking too, you know, I think creating that culture too is also not waiting for somebody to bring something to you. I mean, hopefully if you have a trusting relationship, you know, with the person you're supervising, if you notice they're a little bit off or whatever, you know, maybe you taking the first step, is everything okay? I noticed you seemed, you know, whatever, so that you create that culture too of openness, which I think in the long run can also reduce, you know, harassment, because I think when you know that people talk about their feelings and, you know, not that it's, you know, as like, I mean, not with a lack of boundaries, but that you're valued. I'm just wondering also in the long run.
Yeah, Dana, and you just teed up so beautifully a piece that I was going to leave for towards the end of this, but I'll name it now. Yeah, it is actually the responsibility of supervisors to be proactive, right? So according to like, sorry, within the context of harassment law and employment law, there's a concept called knew or should have known, right? which supervisors are responsible to. So what does that mean? So I'm sorry, know or should have known or should have known. So known is obvious, right? I witnessed it, I experienced it, I knew about it, right? Should have known, what does that mean to folks? Following up on what Dana just said, what do you think should have known? What's the requirement there for supervisors? Rena, go ahead.
I mean, if you know if you are aware of the people around you and their body language and their demeanor, and you notice that someone is, seems like they are not themselves or are having a tougher time reaching out to them, you should have known that something was up and maybe reached out to them and say, do you need, would you like to have a minute? Can we talk? Can I help you with something? And just being aware of other people's needs.
Yeah. And to just refine that a little bit, right? Supervisors are not expected to be mind readers, right? And some of us are more attuned than others. The idea of should have known is that in the course of the normal execution of your responsibilities as a supervisor, which includes checking in with your supervisees and being present, and if you're supervising an activity, like paying attention to what's happening, if in the course of that, you should have known something, right? The fact that you didn't because you either weren't paying attention, weren't present, or ignored it is not sufficient. What's the word I'm looking for, Nicole? Excuse, but that's not the word. But it does not get you or the organization out of the responsibility for
right. So to be clear, we're actually talking about a legal standard. So when there is an actual legal situation going on with a harassment or discrimination claim, if there is legal substance enough to say that the supervisor was negligent in not doing the job that would have then shown them what was going on, because they are required to know or known or should have known. So it doesn't, as Andrea just said, it doesn't, just because you didn't know doesn't mean that you're necessarily there's still a liability potentially for the organization.
Right. And I will say that like that standard applies everywhere, and it is easier to kind of, the example that we always had, that the person who helped us with the initial development of this curriculum always gave was a factory example, right?
Right.
Of a supervisor who spent the entire time sitting in their office with the door closed, right, not paying any attention to what was going on the factory floor, when in fact, as part of their responsibilities, they should have been walking the factory floor. And had they been walking the factory floor, they would have seen the things that were going on, right? So a JCC is not a factory, right? And yet, we recognize that, like, if I'm the supervisor for I'll use the aquatics department because that's one of the departments we have here, right? If I'm the supervisor of the aquatics department and I'm not checking in with my staff on a regular basis to see how things are going, and occasionally like showing up to like walk the line, shall we say, right? And then I have less information about what's happening on the ground with my employees.
One of our jobs as supervisors is to put into place, whether it's those one-to-ones or whether it's, if there is a space that you need to be walking to see what's going on, right? That what are you doing to actively take the temperature of what's happening for your staff people? And the last thing I just want to say is that there is a direct correlation. There's research that shows a direct correlation between dips in performance and people having had psychologically unsafe experiences at work. And so another important tool is that very often there's a correlation in timing between the performance review when an employee is being told that your performance is a problem, and then the fact that they actually were having a difficult experience, but they didn't report it. And then sometimes that gets like muddy, right? Because then it can look like, well, you're making an accusation because we gave you a poor performance review. So we want to avoid that scenario and know that if there's a performance issue that you're starting to see, get curious, right? Get curious, like not just what's going on in the holistic picture of that person's experience of employee well-being.
Thanks, Nicole. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen again, and we're going to walk through. So we've gotten to a place where someone has come to report something, right? And they've asked for.
Pause for a second. Your screen is showing your background as well.
Oh, thank you for letting me know that. I'm going to stop the share and see why it's doing that. Hold on.
I can also do the slides right now if you'd rather.
That would be great. Thank you.
You keep talking.
So, thanks. So we're in a moment right now where someone has come to you, and these are the kind of things that happen where like you're not expecting it, but they're giving you a report, right? And so empathy is, as we talked about, it's not sympathy. It involves perspective taking, removing judgment, right? So not, why didn't you come to me sooner or something like that. Recognizing the emotions of the other person, and really connection. Can you go to the next slide? Right. So when someone comes to give us a report, we want to remain present and avoid distractions. We want to listen with empathy and without judgment. We want to ask sincere questions, not probing questions, but tell me more, or I can see that you're feeling X. Can you tell me a little bit more about the situation, right? To be open-minded and willing to alter your beliefs when presented with new information, right? So sometimes someone comes to you and they're giving a report and it's surprising, right? The person that they're talking about or the experience is like, it's shocking and surprising, right? So we need to notice our own reaction in that moment and then stay open-minded. Recognize the importance of your position and interactions, right? As supervisor, your reactions and interactions. Make sure you take mental note if they share the basics of the who, what, when, and where, right? So in this moment, right, this is not an investigation. This is not even necessarily the filing of the official report. This is someone coming to you for the first time to share with you for the first time what's going on. So you're not going to do a lot of note taking in that moment. You're not going to ask a lot of who, what, where questions. You're going to listen and be present. When that meeting ends, you're going to want to jot down what you can remember and then tell them what you're required to do with the information and what happens next. And that's, again, going back to, and that would be going back to your policies. Where up the chain does it need to go, if it needs to go up the chain? Can you, so these are your do's, and there is a handout in your folder that has these do's and don'ts. So what you're not going to do is investigate or interview the person in this moment. There will be an opportunity, if warranted, for follow-up. This is not that moment. They're not making a report in this moment. They are sharing a problem. You're never going to ask why the person did or didn't do something, because that's going to imply judgment. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you stand up? All of that, right? And you're also not going to affirm that what they're sharing happened, but rather that if it's happening, it will be addressed promptly. Why would that be the case? So in other words, we're going to take the report, we're going to convey that we hear them, that we honor, that we appreciate, that we recognize their feelings and everything that they're sharing with us. But why is it important to kind of stay in that conditional space as opposed to saying, affirming their version of the story? Why is that important? Anyone? What do you think?
You want to hear both sides of the story in case, just in case it's not actually happening in that way, because this person that reporting is using I statements.
Yeah, exactly, Natalie. Thank you. Right. So we want to be, there may be more to the story that we need to investigate. to have a full picture. And if we affirm what their version of the story, we're also creating expectations on the part of that employee. And so that's really critical. So how do you affirm someone's truth even if it's not fact instead of using if statements? That is a great question, Kai. It's tricky. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. So we say things like, thank you for sharing this with us. Those types of behaviors are outside of what we, like outside of the policies of our organization. And it's hard to not use an if, right?
Well, I'm going to look further into what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm going to take steps according to our policies and procedures to investigate further what's happening here.
Right. And you start with the thank you. Thank you for coming to me. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Christine said you can also affirm by repeating back what I heard you say is blah, blah, blah. Marilyn, I see you raising your hand a couple of times.
Yeah, isn't it also important to know why somebody hasn't reported it? Isn't that a factor without judgment? Just to know why they felt that there was something that was threatening them if they did. I just think that's important, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're judging them.
Yes. So yes. And so here's what I say in this moment, like that's a follow-up, right?
Right.
That's a follow-up conversation. And I would encourage you to like find other ways, like why questions always sound like judgment. Why questions always sound like judgment, no matter how carefully we word them. Why questions have an implied judgment and they tend to put people on the defensive. So think about like, what's another way of asking the question? What do you think got in your way of coming, like what obstacles did you face in reporting this? Or was there something that kept you from reporting, right? Approaching it that way, but not necessarily in this report again, or in this moment, this conversation, right? This is the chance to listen. So what would happen now, so I'm going to pull up to a meta moment. What would happen now in the training that you were leading is that you would put people into triads and they would get to practice these best practices. And the way it would work is there would be one person who was playing the employee, one person who was in the role of supervisor, and one person who's in the group as an observer and a coach. And the person who's reporting, the employee, is going to choose a scenario. In person, you have a handout, you would be able to cut it up into slips and someone would choose it out of a jar or a bag or a box or whatever you have. So that much more like real life, the supervisor doesn't know what the scenario is, right? Because that's I think important to think about, right? Like these are not planned conversations for the supervisor. You are often blindsided by this, which makes it even harder and therefore worth practicing, being able to get connected and present and notice, oh, this emotion is coming up. I'm going to notice it and let it go so I can stay present to the employee who's coming. And so that would be the practice that you would invite your participants to do. We don't have time today to do that practice, but I'm just can you go to the next slide? I think it has before we go to the next slide, on page 55, in your
manual,
you will see at the second part of the page, right? There are the employee problem scenarios. And I just want to take a moment and have you look at them and notice that a lot of them are not about unlawful harassment. A lot of them are not clear-cut cases of unlawful harassment. And
go ahead. You also have these in handout 7, has all the tips, and handout 8 also has the scenarios. Those are the two places you have them in your manual and in the handout.
Yeah. I love Molly. By the way, Molly put in this, were there any barriers to reporting this that you encountered before today? Molly, that's great. I love that. Christine, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if your approach would change at all if your very first interaction with an employee, or your first conversation, if they came to you and said very specifically, I want to file a, sexual harassment claim. Like if they're very definitive and like, I want to file, a claim, would your approach in that initial conversation change?
Yeah. If they've gotten to the point where they're like, I want to file, right? Then you are going to refer to your organization's policies and follow those procedures.
Which doesn't mean that in the conversation, you wouldn't apply these principles around how to talk to that person about their experience, but you then have a direct ethical and legal responsibility to make sure that you are assisting them in filing the way that your organization handles those. And I just also want to drive home deeply that best practice around any time that something rises to the level of discrimination or harassment, unlawful harassment, sexual or otherwise, is outside investigation. We have seen over and over in a lot of the recent press around congregational challenges that is where things are handled well, is where outside investigation was brought in. So that should be a practice and policies and procedures that are well built in, especially for JCCs, because you're all in sizable and fairly infrastructured organizations. I understand there are different variations in terms of who's represented here, but that should be part of the policy and procedure that's clear already today from the organization of what happens if somebody files an actual claim and that there is external investigation.
And I want to pick up on the question that Rena put into the chat. Does the supervisor need to involve HR at this point or in the follow-up? So that's a great question. And that is a discernment question, right? So depending on the issue, right? The issue might be so-and-so continues to interrupt me every time we're having, like in every staff meeting or every time we're having a team meeting, I never can get a word in edgewise. And I just feel like I don't even know why I show up to these meetings, right? That is an important report and something you want to address. But that is different than I feel like so-and-so is stalking me in the building and I don't feel safe, right? Or so-and-so keeps using the, racial slurs in my presence and, right? So that's one of the reasons that this training includes a discussion of protected classes and being able to differentiate in the continuum between what is unlawful harassment or what looks like it could be unlawful harassment and what isn't. Not because it is your responsibility or the supervisor's responsibility to understand whether something rises to the level of illegality, right? Whether it is unlawful or not, but just to build up your discernment. And so you might, and if you're unsure, our response is always, if you're unsure, then bring someone else in, your supervisor, HR, whomever it is that your policy, right? If you don't know, then you would want to bring someone in. Hey, does this warrant an investigation? Or is this something that I as a supervisor or my team can handle?
Every person in your organization should know who they go to if they're having an issue. And that includes supervisors at very high levels of management, knowing who their lateral colleague is, who they go to when something comes up and they need support and to figure out next steps. So I just want to lift up again that there is a practice here that when you're in your training groups, that you will have people practice with these scenarios. And for time, we're going to move to the last piece of this, which is a very important piece of our reporting conversation.
So often when people come to us, they might start a conversation with, I want to say something, I need to tell you something, but please don't share this with anyone, right? When we're talking about potentially something not going well within an organization, we have to respond to that request with confidentiality by saying something like what we have up here. Can I get somebody to read the first bubble?
There are some things I can keep between you and me and some things I can't, but I hope you'll let me help.
Great. And can somebody read the second bubble?
If you tell me something that is illegal and or clearly against policy, I'm required to report it to my supervisor or HR.
Right, thank you. And the last one.
Oftentimes things don't get better until you do something about them. So I hope you'll tell me what's going on so I can help, even though I can't keep it a secret.
Right. So these are some of the ways that you can respond. And really at the end of the day, it's, you know, if I want to refer back to that, what Nicole said, which is in the, you know, I guess it's not so recent now, but research by the EEOC found that on average, it took employees 16 months from the time of an incident to reporting it. And during those 16 months, it wasn't getting better. It was either staying the same or getting worse. And so what's important to help an employee understand is that the reason that you need to share it is so that you can take action, so that the behavior that's impacting them will stop. And that you can't do that if you're asked to keep it in confidentiality. I have a colleague who has been through this training with me a number of times and works in an organization where people often come to tell her confidential things, right? And they might say, I have to tell you something, but I need you to keep it a secret, or I need to tell you something, but I really would like for you not to share it with anyone. And the response that she's developed is, before you start, let me just say that if this has something to do with, like that last one, if this has something to do with something that is illegal or causing harm, then I am not able to keep it confidential, but I hope you'll let me help you. And otherwise, I'm here to listen, right? Because it could be that someone's coming to say, like, I've just started IVF treatments and I'm going to have to take a couple of days off from work, right? Or I'm going through a difficult divorce and child custody and it's impacting my, like, sometimes we don't know what it is. And the employee says, like, I need to share something with you, but it's completely confidential, right? So we want to find a way to say, okay, as long as it's not about this, yes, right? But this is, it's an important thing, because our instinct, again, coming from a place of empathy, is to want to create as safe and compassionate a container as we possibly can. And so if someone's making a request, please keep this confidential, our instinct might be to say, like, of course, but that would then put us in a real bind if what they're sharing is an instance of harm or something that potentially rises to the level of unlawful harassment, because we then can't go out the chain as we need to. So any questions about this section? And we'll have some time for questions later today and tomorrow, but anything that's popping for you in this moment. Okay, so we're going to take what we like to call a one function bunk. Oh, no, we have two hands raised. Okay, so I see Molly and Christine. Did you raise your hand again, or it's still raised? Okay, Molly, you have a quick question. You have a question.
Yeah, quick question. I feel like what I was hearing from other people's questions was kind of a lack of clarity around the structure within which we should be acting with empathy. I think that this group in particular has a natural affinity towards acting with empathy, and that's an area in which I can speak for myself. I feel very comfortable working, but where I get confused often is, what is the structure when we're working in a JCC? There are so many different layers of supervisors or management or departments that grow, that finding the right structure within which to contain an incident and address an incident can be confusing. And I find that pops up frequently in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, Nicole, did you?
I'm wondering if what you're sharing reflects a need for the organization to do some work around clarifying some of that. And it's a question, it's a wonder. I don't know that that's true, but is it possible that there's some clarifications and some like systems and containers that could be identified more distinctly that would help with more clarity about who needs to handle what and in what way? Do you think that that's something that's where there's some internal work to be done?
I think there certainly is, and I think that that's something that amongst those within our agency, our conversations last week and this week, we've talked about and started the ball rolling. I guess what I'm trying to get after is I don't know. I'm going to figure out a better way to articulate what I'm asking.
We want to hear it.
Can I take a stab at it, Molly?
Sure.
As a supervisor, you want to be empathetic to the employee, and you want to protect and support the organization, right? And so, for example, let's take the scenario that you brought up where somebody comes to you and says, oh, I want to let you know that I'm pregnant and I'm going to be out a little bit more with appointments, but I don't want anybody to know yet, right? Now, as a supervisor, there's a question of, well, I need to figure out coverage. I need to figure out the best way of making sure that the work that's getting done needs to get done, and being empathetic to the person. And there are the policies in terms of vacation and sick time and all of that as well. But that notion of being empathetic, balancing it against being able to protect a person's privacy and being able to do the work, not from the perspective of harassment or not giving them equal opportunity, but who needs to know what, I think is it's hard to always quantify it, even from a policy and a procedure perspective.
Yeah, so I want to point out two things. One, so if someone comes to you and they're in the process, they're pregnant or they're trying to get pregnant or whatever, like that's not a report of harm or a problem, right? And so my guess is that your organization, right? You might refer to them to the policies of sick leave and whatever, and ask like, do you think you might need extra time? What do you need? Right? I will tell you that like I personally had the experience of sharing that with a supervisor, and then a month later having somebody on the board come and congratulate me for trying. And I can tell you that that was a very upsetting experience. Now, that doesn't mean that perhaps my supervisor felt the need to share with someone, but somebody somewhere dropped the ball. And now we're in the territory of sharing, inappropriate sharing of personal information, right? So I name that because like that sharing, right? Like those are things you want to think about. When it comes to harm and a problem, right? An employee might report, that they have a problem with their direct supervisor. So they're reporting to that person's supervisor, or they're reporting to someone parallel on the structure who is not their supervisor, right? And I think in all of those cases, the initial response is with empathy, and then it's to take a step back, which is why we talk about not having, about not promising confidentiality. And to figure out like, okay, who do I speak to now up the chain to help me think about how to address this? And I know that's not a perfect answer, but that is part of the work that we invite organizations to get clearer and clearer on. So I am mindful of the time. And I know that this is sticky. So Christine, did you have a new question?
No, I just thought maybe something to offer there. In that there's some things that are confidential. You may have logistics or things that you have to work through, like I said, staffing and things like that, but it doesn't mean you have to share the confidential piece of information to do that. So you can kind of go about your business and work without specifically saying why or what, like you don't really have to specifically say the why behind it.
And I think it's really important to just identify that in this context, what we're talking about is specific around confidentiality, is specific to the request that something be kept confidential when it is indeed a report of problematic behavior that could rise to the level of unlawful harassment or discrimination, not the sharing of personal information, even when that personal information may have ramifications on workflow, policy, procedure, function, is not the same thing as what we're really talking about is when somebody comes to you with a report of something problematic happening. And that as a supervisor, you can never promise confidentiality because you don't know whether that might rise to the level of something that could require legal investigation.
So I hope that's clear. And again, if there are more questions, we'll have time later today and tomorrow. We're going to take a one function 5-minute break. It is now 55 past the hour, so we will start again on the hour and do the next module and the last module on the content. So thanks everyone. We'll see you back in 5. We are going to work together to keep ourselves on schedule. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to move into the last of the modules, which is coaching. So whereas, and I'm going to turn things over to Nicole in a moment, but whereas the responding with empathy is an unplanned, at least for the supervisor, an unplanned moment of responding and listening and supporting. And then afterwards, right, figuring out what are my next steps. A coaching moment, right? This module is looking at how supervisors support staff through challenging workplace situations and work with a staff member whose behavior is out of alignment with the values and the expectations. So it's really about coaching and performance. And this is a planned conversation, much like the feedback module that we did with for the employees, right? This is the supervisor version of that. So you'll see again that in this, we also have the SBI model because we want supervisors to know that as well. But I'm going to turn things, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint and do the thing which somehow got messed up.
So I'm having a display problem. I've gone from being able to have two screens to it's just reflecting. So I can't look at two different things. So I do need your slides. Thank you. Genuinely annoyed with my technology right now. Okay, so we are talking about coaching for supervisors, and we want to open with a foundational Jewish values approach to how we think about coaching, which is that Judaism, Jewish tradition holds education as, one of its absolute highest values. And there's a quote from one of our texts called Pirkei Avot, which is the teachings of our ancestors, that says, make yourself a teacher, acquire a friend, and judge every person favorably. And when we think about this in the context of coaching for challenging behavior, we're talking about, as a supervisor and a person that you are either observing yourself is perhaps not in their best selves at work, or it's being reported to you by another colleague that they're having trouble with somebody, that when we approach the feedback to that employee, to that staff person and colleague from a space of education, of teaching, we have an incredible opportunity to really provide help and support. And we want to remember that we have a responsibility to try to help and support someone. It's not just about discipline, but that often challenging behavior is being caused by something difficult or lack of resources that an employee needs that they're not getting. Something is going on for that person. And we want to address the behavior by referring to specific incidents more, which is much more effective than just saying, you're annoying. And always when there's documentation that we can provide in addition, that is really valuable and helpful. And it's really, really important for us to remember as the coach and the supervisor that we can only coach somebody who is coachable, right? And so another Jewish tenet that comes into this framework is the idea of tshuva. The idea that we ourselves, this is something that comes up at the Jewish high holidays. We spend a good season of the Jewish New Year talking about tshuva, about the return or returning to our best selves, our best attributes. And can somebody read this quote from Rabbi Ruth Zlotnick at Temple Beth Am in Seattle, please?
I can read it.
Great, thank you.
I might butcher the name.
Teshuva.
Teshuva is a gift and an obligation. It's a gift to know that we have the path of transformation always open to us. It's an obligation to walk that path and make actual changes in our behavior.
Thank you. So just as the Pure Kavod earlier teaches us that as a coach, we want to be a teacher and we want to judge people favorably, that's our responsibility as the coach. As the employee receiving feedback and coaching, we have to be coming from a place of tshuva, and the best coaching in the world, and this is really important for supervisors to hear, it is not our management failure if somebody is not teachable and not coachable, right? And so to the best of our ability, we bring this lens of teaching and coaching, but we cannot take on the responsibility of the employee to change or to embrace what we're bringing them. So we want to provide for you a specific and pragmatic approach to coaching, which is called the GROW model of coaching. It's based on inquiry. So the idea is that we're going to invite the employee into a conversation process to examine their behavior and their options for change. So we're not just saying, hey, we're observing this or we're hearing this, here's some ways you could do better. We're going to invite them into the conversation. It's going to be a process of inquiry. And it's also really, really important to remember that coaching doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens across relationships of power. So if you think back to the conversation we had last week about power and identity and how power shows up in multiple vectors across our workplaces and our lives, it's really critical to remember that in a role as supervisor and coach, you are always in a position of institutional power, and that there are other power dynamics at play, both in the room between you and a colleague you're coaching, and also in the culture of the organization and whatever is going on for this person, there are power dynamics at play because they're just always there. And that's really important to remember. So you have a handout that has this coaching model. We're going to go through it with you, but you do have a handout 9 has the GROW coaching model. So you can have it right in front of you, because we're going to go through it quickly and then we're going to pop you into some rooms to practice with one another. So the GROW coaching model is on handout 9, and the coaching scenarios you're going to work with in a minute are in handout 10. And Andrea, do you want to go ahead and just walk us through the model?
Yeah. So as Nicole said, this is a scheduled and planned conversation, right? So the G in the GROW stands for goal, right? You're going to be clear on the topic of discussion for this session, for this conversation that you're having with the employee. You're going to let them know the specific objectives, right? And if it's appropriate, set a long-term aim, right? So that's what the G is. You're going to start this conversation knowing that you have a goal in mind of what you want to talk about and where you want to get to, and share that with the participant. R stands for reality, and it can also stand for reflection, right? So in the context of this model, it's, again, as Nicole said, it's not you did this and you should therefore, right? It's an opportunity to invite the person, once you've shared specific examples, for self-assessment. How do you think things have been going? right? What are you noticing? Is there anything coming up for you, right? And inviting them to look at, right? You're going to offer really specific and concrete examples of the behaviors that are out of alignment. You're going to avoid and check any assumptions that you might have about what's causing it, but you're also going to support the employee to avoid and check any assumptions. And if they start to bring up what we would call irrelevant history, you're going to encourage them and invite them to let that go, right? Well, you know, in my old this, or right, like, and stay focused on the concrete examples of the specific. And our recommendation is that when you bring someone in for coaching, that you have more than one, right? This is more than one concrete example that you're going to share with them of their behavior and how it's impacting. And you're going to invite them to think about what the impact of their behavior might be. And then the O stands for options. You're going to invite suggestions from the coachee. What are some things that they think they might need to do differently, right? Cover the full range, offer suggestions carefully, and make sure that the choices to help them move back into alignment are made. And then wrap up the conversation by committing to action, identifying possible additional options, and make step-specific defining timing and agreeing on support that your employee needs in order to get back into alignment. So that's the model, right? And it's a model of inquiry. The other piece of it is that we want supervisors to be using, when we're sharing the constructive feedback piece of it, right? So when we're naming, this is what I'm giving you feedback on, this is what I've heard, that we're going to use the SBI model. So in the G and the R of this, you're going to be using the SBI model. It's a lot of initials, I know. Right? That you're going to name the situation in the meeting when you spoke about on Thursday, or I've heard, people have come to me and shared this information, right? Name the behavior I heard, I saw, I experienced, it was reported to me. And then the impact of that behavior, right? The outcome was what I noticed, or what was reported to me, or what I have observed, right? So you're getting very specific, right? And as with the other one, yes, so Joy, you are right. This is the SBI model is in the book with the giving and receiving feedback, and then it occurred to us that it belongs here as well. So the SBI model is in the book earlier on in the giving and receiving feedback, which is module 6 for employees, and we will send you the additional pages so that you can add them into this place as well. Because it occurred to us as we were putting this together, like, oh, we want because that feedback model is only taught to employees, we realized, oh no, we want you teaching the SBI model to supervisors as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, rather than like debrief it now, what we're going to do is we're going to invite you into groups of 3, and you're going to practice this coaching model, right? And so there's going to be an observer, a supervisor or coach, and an employee. And the way this is going to work is there are 2, right? There's one scenario.
No, can I explain it?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so on handout 9 is your GROW coaching model to refer to while you're in your breakouts. You're going into rooms of 3. Okay, so here's your GROW coaching model. When you get in your rooms, you pick who's going to do what. So you have a coach, supervisor, an employee, and an observer coach, right? So the coach supervisor is active, is doing the active coaching practice. The coach observer is just part of our train the trainer, right? Somebody extra in the room for feedback and discussion. You're going to pick there are 6 scenarios. I'm not going to assign them because it doesn't correlate with the room. So you're going to pick a scenario. And then the employee on handout 11, you have 4 possible attitudes that you're going to respond with. This is your role play, okay? So for instance, if you pick situation 1, then the coach is going to coach on the situation. your whole small group knows what it is. You read situation 1. And then employee, you get to choose. Are you going to be remorseful? Are you going to be angry and defensive? Are you going to freak out? You'll see the different options that are on here. Okay. Coach, supervisor, employee picks how they're going to respond. Observer is there to help give feedback, maybe help the supervisor coach if they get stuck. Everybody got it? And you pick your roles when you get in. We're not assigning them. You can just say, okay, I'll be the coach, I'll be the employee, you choose.
So the thing I want to add to that is the goal of this coaching, if you are the supervisor, is to get the employee to recognize the behavior and the impact of that behavior, and then to work towards remedies, changes in behavior, right? But to do that from a place of not telling, but invitation, and kind of help back everyone before we dive into just debriefing that for a moment. Just take a moment to look around the room, recognize your colleagues, the other fellows in this fellowship, maybe wave. I'd love to hear from the folks who were in the supervisor role. What did you notice when you were in that role as the coach, supervisor coach? What did you notice in this practice session? What came up for you?
I know that for me, it was difficult to get away from the supervisor, like, okay, you're doing this and you need to stop and do more coaching. Like, that was the feedback that Monica gave me, was like, okay, but instead of telling them these are the solutions, like, try to get out of them, like, do you think it would work if we did this? Or how do you think we can solve this problem? I was too much in that, like, direct mode.
I think an important, thank you. I think that's probably really challenging for lots of people. And one thing that occurs to me is what we understand about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? Which is that we know that what people, I mean, this is a lot of like studying with children and parenting, but you know, we're all just children. And that there's, you know, what we know is that when people are motivated intrinsically to do something or not do something, that it's much more consistent and successful than extrinsic. So part of the work of the coaching approach is Tara, exactly as you just said, to try to sort of help people get to it on their own, right? And help them own something around how they're thinking about it, rather than layering in, because the extrinsic motivation of, well, my supervisor, my manager, my boss said I have to do this or can't do this, is just going to be less likely to root and be successful.
Anybody else who played that supervisor role? What's something that you noticed in playing coaching supervisor role? Maybe someone who hasn't had a chance. Erica, yes.
I'll talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So one of the things that came up was that I was very direct in what my meeting was going to be about, but there was no empathy from me. And I find that when I'm talking, and this is a self-reflection of myself, when I'm talking to somebody that I know they're in the wrong, I really don't have a lot of empathy for them, which is a struggle, because I'm feeling empathy for the person, because we did the one about the pronouns. So I'm feeling empathy for the person that is not being heard of what pronoun they want to be called, and the person is doing it on purpose. So I have the empathy for that person, but not for the person who's just like, well, you know, you just need to get with the program.
So that, I think you're touching on something really, really important there. And I said it in my setup for this, but you know, I said it briefly. And so I want to like drill down on this now really critically. You know, the adage, hurt people, right? That when people hurt others, they generally are hurt. And so to the degree that we can help the person we're coaching get to their own root about like what's going on with that behavior, and we can be curious about it, there's often a problem happening for that person, right? And so, and that is not to say that there are not times where we just draw a line and we say, listen, I understand, like with the pronoun situation, I understand that you don't think that you don't agree with the pronoun stuff. This is going on at my child's day school right now, right? Parents were like, this pronoun stuff is stupid, right? And the school's drawing a line and saying, we are going to educate and we are going to get curious and try to support this parent body with understanding and empathy and building a learning space. And we're also going to say, you can't mispronoun our staff and our kids, like, because you've decided that they should be called something or the other. So I think that you can it's both and Erica, to the degree that we can really like be curious and come from a place of why is that person behaving in that way? And is there something that we can do to be in support of them? That is where like change happens, right? Again, between the intrinsic and the extrinsic, more than, again, I mean, I with this kind of stuff, I can't not think about parenting work for me because there's so much that applies. But it's like, we know that when we yell our kids into doing something or not doing something, it might work, but it doesn't hold, right? And it's the teaching and the helping get to the root of something. And I think that it's very challenging especially when the behavior that is being exhibited is something that you're like, no, that's not okay with me, right? I'm not okay with somebody intentionally not using correct pronouns. That's a line in what is acceptable behavior to me in the world. And as a supervisor, we have to check that a little bit so we can be a teacher and help somebody learn and grow.
So I'm going to just add to that and say that, like, because these are planned conversations. So like we dumped you into a scenario and you didn't really have a chance to plan for it, right? But in the world, right? A supervisor is planning for this. And what that means is they get an opportunity to say, okay, I need to find someone who I can talk about how angry this makes me, so that I can express that and be heard myself as a supervisor when I've learned that something is happening in my organization or with my employees that is really upsetting and angering to me. Before I have the conversation with the person who's engaging in that behavior, let me recognize how it's impacting me and get the support that I need to recognize it's impacting me, so that when I am having the coaching meeting, I can be fully present. And asking for feedback from your colleagues and from your friend and from your supporters, like, okay, how do I thread that needle? How do I say, this is the line and you have crossed it and it is not okay? And how do I listen to, like, really what's going on is I'm confused and it makes me scared and I'm uncomfortable and I don't know how and I feel threatened by it. And so this is my behavior is my behavior around the pronoun, for example, is really just an expression of how deeply uncomfortable I am with things that I don't understand, right? And maybe you're able to get to that. You still hold the line of like, okay, well, that behavior is not okay. And how can I support you in learning more so that you, whatever. So let's take one more. I'd love to hear now from the people who were being coached. What did you notice as the employee? Now you were role playing, but what are some of the things that you picked up on in that session of like what landed or didn't? One or two folks.
I noticed that I was taking on the role of being sort of angry and defensive and a real jerk. And Molly, I just sent her a note, like she was coaching me in such a, like it was hard to stay in that position because the extrinsic and intrinsic thing, she did a masterful job of drawing out like this intrinsic reason for me to consider shifting my behavior. And I thought that was very effective. And I wish I'd done as good a job when I was the coach. So thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and what I would point out is that sometimes if we meet people with empathy, it can be harder for them to stay in that really angry, oh yeah, kind of space. One other person, what was your experience being coached? What did you notice?
I have to say something about that. I mean, that's it, right? We want to be so show up with such empathy and curiosity and capacity to hold the space in this way for someone that we knock down their defensiveness when they come angry and defensive, right? So, I mean, like, great job. Don't stay angry and defensive as the employee if what actually happened is that got pulled back for you because you were seen and fundamentally heard and your needs were met, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So much is just about that, is connection is everything.
So
anyone else, you would ask for one or two or no?
Yeah, but I'm curious if anybody else has anything else they want to share from whatever position, from coach, from observer, from participant. Miriam Pedler. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually, my experience, but sort of when we were going through the pre-coaching teaching part, one of the things that I took away from the grow coaching model was that sort of absence of the empathy, especially because we had just spoken about empathy with such depth. And then all of a sudden we have this grow coaching model that doesn't seem to include empathy. So I'm so glad that you guys are touching on how important that it is, because I really felt like it was sort of absent from those letters, you know.
Thank you. That is great feedback for us to think about.
We're thinking about this model. Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Anyone else? And then we're gonna take a break.
So I just want to offer up, this is less about this actual training, but to the degree that you're in leadership roles within your JCCs, that, you know, a great tactic for professional development is for you to have opportunities with other managers to share coaching experiences and tools and skills and tactics and stories that have worked, and to really kind of pool resources around how are your one-to-ones going, right? So we might have a management meeting and talk about performance things, but are we talking about how we're doing as managers? And this can be a model that you can use to really think about, you know, like, even if it's like at management level staff meetings every other month, you're going to spend 10 minutes checking in about how supervision and coaching is going and share best practices.
Yeah, Molly, I see you have your hand raised, and then we're gonna take a break. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, the combination of what Erica said earlier about the challenge when you feel like there's a very clear right and wrong perspective, and then the idea of hurt people. I think it can be helpful to recognize that even if the opinion doesn't feel justified to you, the emotion is real, and the emotion that person is experiencing is real. And so sometimes in terms of the empathy that Miriam Pedler just brought up, operating in terms of honoring that person's emotions can open up the communications in order for them to be able to act honestly, because that you've given validity and acknowledgement to that reality. And sometimes that can act as a gateway into the rest of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So, yay, we've made it through. We are through with the content. What we're going to do now is we are going to take a 23-minute break. So it is 42 minutes past the hour. And so we're going to ask you to come back at somebody who's good at math on their feet. What does that mean? That means we want you to come back. Well, no, but let's just, okay. 20, I don't know.
Quick body exercise, pretty much the same I did last week, because we can't teach without our bodies. And knowing that a lot of this content is activating for different reasons to different parts of our bodies. If you have the capacity and you want to stand up, I want to invite you to stand up with me. Just move your shoulders, notice what aches what doesn't ache, where you're at in space. Make your body big. And then we're going to tap the top of our head just to say, oh, hi, we're arriving. We're arriving. And then you're going to take your pointer finger and your middle finger, and you're going to rub gently kind of right past your sternum. And in Chinese medicine, it said this is where your sense of power and authority lie, your sense of agency. So we're calling ourselves forward. And then we're just gonna take our hands and slap our thighs. Not too hard, not too gentle, but a good little smack. You might notice that the energy is moving around, and this is the reset. So we're all here and present as best we can be. I'm so glad to be with all of you and learning with you and from you. And Andrea, I will now pass to you to give us the lineup.
Yeah, thank you, Emmett. So we are in a few minutes going to go into 2 separate groups because there are so many of you, which is fantastic. We have split the groups in half. We've split the group in half. Chicago, Tucson, the Kaplan JCC on the Palisade, the Strom JCC, and the Riverdale Y are with me. Boulder, Youngstown, Harrisburg, Akron, and San Diego are with Nicole. Today we are going to do groups 1, 2, and 3. So the group that is doing the applying the Jewish lens and the psychological safety, the group that's doing power and identity, and the group that's doing unlawful harassment and policy review. Those are the 3 groups that will go today. The way it's going to work is each group, as we told you, is going to have 25 minutes to present what they prepared. And then we're going to take 5 minutes to give that group some appreciations and some feedback. And really what we're asking when you are not in the teach back mode, what we're asking you to do is like just be noticing, like, what do you notice? What stands out for you? Something that like, oh, I hadn't, like that's a great way of presenting that, or, that kind of offering kind of constructive and supportive feedback, that kind of positive feedback. And we'll take 5 minutes after each group. And then when all 3 groups have gone, we will come back together and close. I will name now that the closing is going to be tight, and there will be time tomorrow and the next day for us to unpack more thoroughly the Teach Back experience. So right now we're going to invite you to focus on like something that you noticed. Yes, that is an excellent, thank you, Jen Ross. Yes, we need to shift the permission so that everybody, so that anyone can share their screen. So that everybody can share their screen. Thank you for naming that, Jen, because otherwise we would have put you in a breakout room and then it wouldn't have worked. But there's a setting that you can change that allows that to happen. So Yael is on that.
Can somebody, according to my settings, everybody can share their screen. Can somebody just test it? Like who's ready right this second to share their screen? At what point? Great. Whoever just did it, thank you. I was calling you, Natalie, but great.
Nicole, anything else you want to share before we pop off? All right.
So, just that I'm going to be the one who has to close the breakout rooms, right? Because I'll be over here.
I don't. Is that what we figured out? No, I think I am. Yael and I are going to be.
Okay. So we actually, who's getting swept to it? Where's Yael? Where is she? Oh, hi. Thank you for waiting. Who's going away and who's staying here?
What? Oh gosh. Your group, the group with San Diego is going away.
Great. So then other people will close the rooms. Great. Okay.
Bye.
See you in about an hour and a half.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
right, I think this is us. Hi, everyone. So just take a moment and take a deep breath.
Should I pause the recording, Andrea?
Yes. Thank you.
You have to provide. So just a note, because that came up in my room that I was like, oh, we didn't do that. So how's everybody feeling? Thumbs up. Tired. Unmute, chat. Let us know how you're doing. How you doing? I love them. This is a very important thumb. Awesome. All right, so we are gonna tomorrow finish up our teach backs, so groups 4, 5, and 6. And then we're gonna spend a small amount of time, less than we'd planned, because nimble facilitation, on a little bit of like practicing role-playing facilitation challenges. So what we need to ask for is 6 volunteers to role play facilitation challenges. So what that means is 3 people will be the facilitators, and you can just use whatever section your group just presented. And 3 people will be the disruptors, and we're going to give you your prompt, right? So if you're the facilitator, you're going to take the part that you just did today, and we're going to pair you with somebody who's going to be a participant who's going to give you a little bit of a hard time. And your prompt might be anything from no, well, I'm not going to tell you what they are. So it should be, and it's fun. We'll do it all together in one group. So I need 3 brave souls who will be facilitators and 3 brave souls who will be challengers. And I've gotten to know you all by now, and every single one of you has a voice and a personality. So you just have to be brave and be like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. 6 of you.
One.
Molly. Hold on, wait, I have to write it down.
So we got Molly,
Natalie, Rena. Who else? I need 3 more. Tara.
Tara.
Miriam Pedler. That's 5. Wait, 2 participants. Oh no, we got them. 1 more brave soul. Jamie, thank you. Okay. Molly, Natalie, Rena, Tara, Miriam, Jamie. So the facilitators will be Molly, Natalie, and Rena. So you're just going to take any part of what you just did just now and just facilitate it. You don't need to, you're not going to get very far, so don't worry about that. And then Tara, Miriam, and Jamie, you're going to be the challengers. And so I'm going to email, you will get an email like today or this evening telling you what your prompt is, what challenge you're bringing. Okay, everybody got that? Thank you. I think we're up to the whip. We didn't start with a whip. We jumped in. That was on me. Sorry.
It's okay.
You ready for it?
Yeah, so we're going to do our 1-word whip, where you're landing today. And we're going to do it as we did it last week. So Nicole's going to name 3 people, and you're going to go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll name the next 3 people. So go ahead, Nicole.
Okay. Yael, Joy, Andrea.
Yikes. No, that's not my word. Juggling. Information.
Educated.
Saturated.
Oversaturated.
Tired.
Sheila, Molly, Miriam Pedler.
Inspired.
Relieved.
Relieved also.
Practiced.
Juggling. Information. Joining the L.
Appreciative and whipped.
Dana, Natalie, Rena.
Encouraged.
Relieved.
Uplifted.
Jamie, Allie, Tara.
Grateful.
Appreciative.
Anxious.
Lauren, Kai, Jen.
Supported.
Tired.
Paired.
Angela, Lori, Denise.
Overwhelmed.
Satiated. Full.
Processing.
Mark, Rebecca, Robin.
Also impressed by all of you.
Done.
Collaborative.
Mallory, you're the last one.
Empowered.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm struggling with one word today, which is not like me, but I'm going to use my power as a facilitator and just say I'm feeling grateful, but I'm feeling grateful because, you know, this is a massive moment for us as Talmud and for me personally, having kind of, I consider myself the adoptive mother of this ship because I did not get it started from the beginning, but to see this work alive in other people's hands, in other people's mouths, and to give it life in that way, which means it's going to have legs and reach others, is a really powerful, incredible moment for me. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you. Thanks for the heart. Okay, so tomorrow we will arrive. We're going to have a quick visitor from Sue Gelsey from JCC Association. Skip the icebreaker because of that, and just kind of have a check-in and jump back into our teach back groups, and then we'll play a little facilitation boot camp. Good to go, Andrea?
Yeah, I'm so deeply appreciative of everything, echoing everything that Nicole said. And I want to say that I'm going to be following up with all of the groups in my group because you all added some amazing perspective and content. And I'm like, oh, what did you do there again? Because, you know, this is a work in progress, right? These are living documents. And every time someone presents it and adds a new perspective and flavor, it enriches us as Ta'amod. So thank you. And we will see you tomorrow. Don't forget to go vote if you haven't already. Please go vote. That's my last thing. Bye, everyone.